Okay, folks, we're moving on to our next lesson here, and that is lists. So lists work a lot like tuple, and you might be saying to yourself, hey, I'm seeing more comma separated values here. What's the point? Well, the biggest thing is that lists are mutable, meaning that you can actually change these after the fact. And tuples are not. So tuples, you can do things like add them together, or maybe do what seems like you're altering a value, but it's going to a new spot in memory. You're not actually getting rid of the first version you made, right? So if names is Bob, comma Dave, and then you add something, it's going to actually be under a different spot in memory. So it is immutable, as in unchangeable. You can sort of make updated versions of it under a new spot in memory, but it won't actually change the original. And lists, on the other hand, are going to be mutable, meaning we could change them. So you can use them to store multiple items as a single variable. A quick note, as far as to why they look basically the same, one's mutable, one's not. It sounds like it comes down to they're built on the C language. So basically these have a method. And when I say method, I mean you could put like list dot append or list, dot, and you have these methods that will actually change this. Those are just not built into our tuples up there. So they just don't have the methods or behaviors for the class, it sounds like. And of course, use case. There's some things where immutable is good. All right, so on to this. So up here, I went ahead and I made one called teachers, and me, Mr. Wise, Jane, Bob, and Alice. And you're noticing that we're now using square braces, unlike the tuples, because over here we had parentheses, right? Now, I did go through and kind of mix it up here, combining some of these. And once again, they can be nested and combined to some degree. But one thing I can do on these is I can check the length. So you can see I put print and then length, and then as a parameter teacher. So that's going to grab this. And if I hit play, the length is 4. All right, now I've gone through, and same thing as we did with tuples, these have an index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, you start on 0, just like you do with tuples. Now, if I'm printing teachers 0, that index refers to the first value, aka Y's. If I say for I in range, length teachers, much like we did over here with our 4, we're saying for I in range of the length of classified, and then printing each one, and we'll print them one by one, right? So we're doing the same thing here. This will start on 0, and it will count up and repeat this block of code until we get to the length of this, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So it goes through 0, and 0 is not 4. So it goes ahead and prints teachers, and this is 0 at this point, I. And that goes back, and because it's 4, it's going to automatically increment that, meaning add 1 to it. So I now becomes 1. This is the first. Since this was 0, this is value 1. So it's going to pull that in, and it's still not equal to 4, the total value. So it's going to go ahead and print teachers 1, which is Jane. And it continues. Once it gets here after Alice, it does hit this range length. And so it jumps out of this block of code. Now for I in range length teachers here, we can also print the index first for each one and then the actual value. So that is, here we're printing teachers 0, which is Y's. And then we are printing each one here for I in length is going to print each teacher. But notice on this one here, we're actually printing the indexes with it too. So the first loop is going to find 0, which is Y's, 1, which is Jane, 2, which is Bob, and then 3, which is Alice. Now here I made a variable called reverse-C, and it equals sorted. So sorted, and you can kind of mouse over, and VS Code will help you with this as long as you have the right extensions and stuff and IntelliSense installed. So it's an iterable, it supports rich comparison. You can see some of the options parameters we have here. So sorted, I'm first giving out what I want it to sort, teachers. And then I have a Boolean value here. So the parameter of reverse is true. This is actually going to reverse it. So when I say for I in range reverse C. Now keep in mind, I have saved this. I didn't write over the original. When I sorted it, it's saved into a new variable, so it is not touching our original teachers. This is still in memory as teachers, and this is saved under a new variable, aka a new spot in memory. So now we're saying for I in range, and once again, this counts up to the length of reverse C. We're just going to execute this block of code. So print is reverse C I minus 1. Now keep in mind, when we have a list here, like we are going through 4 things that are in like an array here. If you start with 0, 1, 2, 3, if we take -1, it's actually going back 1 from the beginning, which goes to the end. So a good way for you to quickly jump to the end of an array or a list or things like this is to say -1. And so reverse C here. For I in range of length, we're going to go back 1 index each time. So we're taking the index and subtracting 1. So if it starts at 0, we're actually going to go from y's, which is 0, and we're going to subtract 1, meaning the index is actually Alice now. So we're going to see Alice, and then we're subtracting 1 from the index. So it went from 3 to 2, which is y's, and then Jane and the Bob, right? Okay. And this is a little confusing because we sorted it once here, and then we kind of it backwards there, right? So we've altered our order a little bit here. But yes, you can do these methods on it. Okay, so lists, some other things we can do. So number 1, like I said, is mutable. It's changeable, meaning we can change, add, and remove elements from the list. Since lists are indexed, the list can have multiple items with the same value. So this list, apple, banana, cherry, apple, cherry, if you were to print this list, this is what we get. We already looked at the length for the list. And then lists can be items of any type. So here we have strings, which are, of course, characters. Apple, banana, cherry. We can have a list of integers. And here we have a list of Boolean values, aka true, false. Lists can contain different data types. So sort of like what we looked at over here. I mean, technically, these are all coming down to strings, but this one is just saved under a variable here. But these could be numbers too, along with names and stuff, right? So sort of the same thing we looked at before. We could put something like a name, an age, etc. in here. So type, we checked out type before. Type is going to tell you what data type these are. So because all of those are strings, they are individual type string, but overall they're a list, right? So it's telling me the type here. Okay, constructors, we're going to save that for a bit later. It's basically when you're making, if you've heard an object-oriented programming, you're initializing a list. It could be something like a student, and a student's going to have methods like things they can do, and it's going to have some parameters that are things it can be, or some attributes, right? So a student might have a name, a student might have a student ID, and a student might be able to do things, like a student might be able to go to class or ask to use the restroom. So you would make a class that has those common things, and then you would make a new version for each student. So the student could initialize from that class with a student who's Bob, and Bob is going to have those things he can do, the methods or behaviors, and he's also going to have the things he can be. So stuff like his name, etc. But we'll talk more about constructors later. Just understand that here they are using that constructor idea to make a new list. So this has double rounded brackets. There you go. Okay, so the 4 collection data types are list tuples, sets, and dictionaries. So we're going to talk about dictionary in the next set of videos, and then sets. Okay, one cool thing we can do after you throw in dictionaries too, they have something called zip. So I mentioned parallel arrays earlier. So let's say that I had something like a class list where this is 0, 1, 2, 3, and another list, which is the name here, 0, 1, 2. Sometimes you can run these because the index for both these is 0, the index for these is 1, etc. But they also have a cool little thing here called zip for Python. What this function allows you to do is combine some of these things. And notice it's taking this and this and is putting them into groups, right? So the 0 index here is 0 index here. And that's 1 unit, as we can see in these parentheses. And that's doing it for the next set, Christy and Charles, right? So this is kind of a cool thing because if we were to take something like names for students, and then we're going to put some classes in. Notice I'm not using class or anything that's protected here. That can cause you some problems if you do that by accident. So you want to be cognizant of what those are, and always keep an eye. You're not using a reserved word, as they call it. I like cats. We're going to pretend there's a cat science class. All right. So if we had 2 different databases or something like that that had these, we could go through and we could do something like schedule equals zip. And then parentheses, we tell what we're combining separated by commas. So names, classes. Now, they're printing these as tuples, but you can also print them as a dict. So let's jump back here once. We should have an option. Okay, so I have print tuple schedule there. Let's see what happens. So now we're getting Bob has biology. And we have Lindsay cat science and Fred art. So that worked pretty great. I combined those. And I believe we can put dict in here. Let's just double check and see if I'm doing this right. Yep. Now we have dictionaries. Let's talk about in a bit. But notice we have a name value pair. So combining together stuff here by index can be very helpful because you can take lists, and I say list loosely, I mean basically data from different sources that is organized in the same numerical order, like first thing in both lists first, the things you need to combine, second for both second, etc., and zip those together. All right, so back here to our list lesson, we can also do things like append. So appending, because these are mutable, we're actually adding content, Career Center, to this list of names. Now remember, teachers up here was Wise, Jane, Bob, and Alice. So when we're taking this list here and we're appending it, we added this. And notice down here, this did work. When we print teachers. Okay. When you're adding new stuff, notice like when we do append, it did go on to the end here. We can use list, data types, all that stuff, and type, like we figured. So that basically covers the basics of lists. Now you can go into a list, and by referencing its index here, you can change that particular thing. So in here, let's go down, and we're going to say teachers to. Notice my code coloring, that was off. So always be paying attention to your code coloring here. And then we're going to say that is equal to Kevin. Okay, now we're going to go ahead, copy this, and we're going to print teachers again. Let's see what happens. Okay, notice this is different, right? So remember, indexes start from 0. So 0, 1, 2. This would be the third item, which was Bob. It is now Kevin. Now, notice it didn't push it back. Bob is not there. Bob is gone, completely replaced. So just be cognizant of that. We had a replacement. Append. Notice the append is going to just throw it on the end. So if we didn't want to do that, then what we'd do is we would maybe do an append if this was okay to go on the end and we didn't want to get rid of Bob. So let's go ahead and add something to the end here. Teachers dot, and remember the dot is a method. Once again, when I talked earlier about lists and tuples, why one's mutable and one is not, notice these dots are methods or behaviors that are already built in. I didn't have to make a definition for append. It is already built into lists. So when I say append here, that is some of the nature of mutability. Some of these methods that come with them are just absent for tuples. All right, so let's append, and we're going to throw in value of all right, let's see what happens now. So we'll go ahead and hit the play button. Okay, so I gave 2 arguments here. Now, be mindful of that because can we put multiples easily this way? No. There's some other ways around that where you can do things differently. But we'll go ahead and do this. And now notice we have Halloween on the end. Now there are some workarounds where you can add more values, but we'll come back to that later. All right. If you want to change a range of items, we talked about range and using the for loop, but we didn't talk about slicing it. So here you can say things like starting at 1 and going by every third value. So as far as range, let's take a look at that because there's some specific stuff we can put in for range. Oops. So here, for range of 6, for n and x, and basically we're not giving a starting place, so it's going to assume it starts at 0, just like an array starts at 0, right? So it'll start at 0, and then we'll count up to 6. If you don't give it an explicit starting point, it starts at 0. Okay, so jumping back, we have more granular control if we need it. We can do start, stop, and step. So if I were to go in and say something like for I in teachers, oops. Okay, so we have to use range, but here what we want to do in this case is that we can just take teacher, and in the index where you put I or 0 or whatever, we can tell it that we want it to start here, and then we're going to. Okay, so we have to use range, but here what we want to do in this case is that we can just take teacher And in the index where you put I or 0 or whatever, we can tell it that we want it to start here, and then we're going to slice it every, say, second, and then print I. So let's see what that does there. Okay, and I have an error here. Let's see, so for I and teachers. Oops. Let me take this accidentally, meant to put this down a little bit lower here. Okay, so this is now skipping. It's starting at 0. The first value is Y's, and then going to every second value. So looking at the top, this is what we have. Or sorry, actually, in this case, we're going to the second value. Okay, so I just adjusted this. So here, I'm using teachlen to put the length in just an easy to use little variable here. So we've appended Halloween, changed sex, put a Kevin, etc. This is where our list is basically coming out to now. So then down here we can say for I and teachers. Now where we would put I or index number, instead of using range, we're actually using what they call a slice here. So we give it the starting value, then a colon, and then what the ending value should be, or how long it goes. In this case, the length of the teaching. So once the whole thing is done and it's gone through all these values, this is when it stops after Halloween. And then another colon, and then we're doing it by ranges of 2. So it's going to start at 0, which is Y's, the first index, right? And that's going to jump to Kevin. So it's skipping, and then jump to Career Center. You can see here if I said something like 3 for the steps it would take, that's just going to Y's, so jumping to Alice, and then there's no third value over here because Halloween's the last. Okay, so that's sort of the basics of lists. We'll cover those in more detail later. I will make sure to go over our documents with you in class, but just a few things to keep in mind. So we'll cover dictionaries next, but for our tuples, that's going to be things like we can add tuples. Since they're immutable, they need to go into a new variable there. Print, they can be sorted or reverse sorted, packed and unpacked. And just remember on that, unpacking is when you make some variable names and it automatically fills the values that you loaded into the tuple back into those variables. All right, we'll talk more about this in class, but here's recording for you to go over if you have any questions or just to study a bit more in depth at your leisure. Have a great day.